Thank you for joining. And your audio is going to be muted, but if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll deal with them. So again, thank you for joining. Let me begin with a quick story to illustrate what we're going to talk about today. About 10 years ago, a CEO and one of his board members of a large company came to see me about succession planning. They actually had been stuck with their succession plan for about 4 years, believe it or not. They hired a national expert who gave them a report, and the CEO said, "Brad, you know what we've done with that report?" "Yeah, nothing." He felt he couldn't step down because there was still a fair amount of family discord. See, there were 3 heir apparents on one side of the family and 1 heir apparent on the other side of the family. And there was a real problem in trying to decide who it was going to be. So I explained my process, which included having 4 quarterly meetings and a structured roadmap. The board member wasn't convinced. He says, "We don't need that. We can solve this in a couple meetings." I said, "Great." But I told them I couldn't help them unless they were willing to commit to my process. So what did they do? They got up and left. I was a little disappointed, but about 3 months later, the CEO calls me back. And he says, "Brad, will you meet with me and my division presidents at this meeting we have coming up?" I didn't know what to expect, but I was going to stick to my guns, and I explained my process to them. Thankfully, they were all in. And I'm happy to report within a year's time, we had completed the succession plan. The CEO was able to step down and move into the executive chair role and name new leadership. Both sides of the family were happy because we followed a process as opposed to just picking somebody. And I'm also happy to report the company has had record years, year in and year out. So that experience should teach us something, that succession isn't about quick fixes. It's about a process, it's about structure and execution. And that's what we're here to talk about today. A little bit about me. I won't bore you. I'm an attorney, former CPA, 35 years practicing law. I've dealt with hundreds and hundreds of family businesses. I've started 6 companies. 2 of the companies made the Inc. fastest growing companies 9 times. I've had partners. We've had fights. Not all the businesses were successful. So I've walked in the shoes of many business owners. About 12, 15 years ago, I started working on developing the succession solution, and I committed it to a book that was a bestseller on Amazon. It's been sold in 12 different countries. I've been named by Worth Magazine as a top 100 lawyers. I spoke at various locations. I've even been cited by the United States Supreme Court. But that's relatively meaningless in many regards. It's about how I can help you today in my process, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about myself. All right, so as I said before at many presentations, Ben Franklin once said, "The only 2 things certain in life are death and taxes." When it comes to business, I think you can add succession because it's going to happen one way or the other. All right, so let's level set for a moment here, because whether you call it transition planning, succession planning, whatever you want to call it, in my world, I define succession planning as 3 things. First, it's the transfer of knowledge and skill, the transfer of management, and the transfer of ownership. And I believe you've got to do the first one first. You've got to train people, educate them, show them the skills. Once you determine they have those skills, you can move them into management. And then ultimately, you've got to figure out what you're going to do with the ownership. What succession planning is not just, it's not estate planning. It's not selling your business. It's not creditor protection, putting your assets into a trust. Those are elements of a succession plan, but they aren't the succession plan. A bad estate plan can screw up a succession plan. Clearly, they have to be coordinated. But to say I have my an estate plan, which is my succession plan, I think it's a mistake. So just so where we're coming from, it's the transition of knowledge, management, and ownership. All right. So why does a business owner want to be bothered? Well, I got so many things going on in my life. Why do I want to be bothered with succession? Well, let me tell you a few reasons why they should be bothered. The Boston Consulting Group interviewed a number of investment bankers, and they asked them about the value of succession planning. And the investment bankers said that a company that has a defined succession plan is worth about a turn to a turn and a half in value. So if a company is selling for 5 times earnings, if they have a succession plan, they'd sell for 6 or 6.5 times earning. And I mean, doesn't that make sense? If I'm buying your company and you have a defined succession plan with respect to management and training, isn't that company more valuable? And I'd suggest to you it's even more sustainable. You want to prepare time when you leave. As I started the story at the very beginning, that CEO wanted to leave. He was in his 70s, but he couldn't leave because he felt he needed to have a good plan in place. So if you're thinking, 5 to 10 years out, you want to start thinking about this if you're a business owner. It allows the next generation to prepare for transition. I've often in the past told about the Longaberger story, where David Longaberger had the successful company, a basket weaving company, handed the business over to his daughter, passed away a year later, and business was gone 10 years later because she wasn't prepared. So you want to give the next generation a chance to prepare. An obvious one, it addresses extreme matters of illness or death. Many years ago, I worked with a gentleman, had a sign company. Unfortunately, he fell off the cherry picker, as they call it, was in a coma for 2 months because everything was in his name. He lost the business because the wife couldn't sign any checks. It was very drastic. So that kind of stuff is simple to take care of. You want to minimize tax burdens. If you have enough time, you can prepare for an efficient, not taking advantage of any laws here, but an efficient tax structure. I represented a mother who was the owner of a company, and she wanted to get out, and she was paid compensation, and she was doing very, very little. And I said, well, what would happen if you stop getting your compensation and start selling your stock back to the company? We turned ordinary income into capital gain income. And she thought it was terrific, and everything was fine, and we talked about transfer of ownership. That's just one example, right? It creates certainty for the business through transition. And I will tell you, when I am interviewing employees and leaders that are not family members or not involved in necessarily the leadership, I ask them, what's the one thing you'd like to learn or have in the succession plan? And they say, Brad, we just want certainty. We just want to know what the deal is, right? Ryan Holiday wrote a terrific book. It's called The Obstacle is the Way. And he talks about, in life, we all face obstacles. We can't let that stop us. And sometimes we actually have to identify the obstacles. So let's talk about the obstacles that your clients face, what I have seen with succession. There's emotional obstacles. And if you don't think there's emotion involved, you're crazy. There is a lot of emotion involved. The stakes feel high. They don't want to mess this up because they're going to have usually just one chance, especially in a family business. One of the things I tell people is you can have many businesses, you can only have one family, right? And so it's a financial stakes, a family stakes. You don't want to mess anything up. You're planning for your obsolescence. I mentioned to you the gentleman at the very beginning, my story. One of the lines he gave me, I'll never forget. He said, Brad, my fear is I'm going to go from he's the man to who's he. It's real. You have conflicting business interest and family interest. And the story that I gave at the beginning, the wife did not want a certain member to be the CEO, even though some of the employees thought the CEO, that person was the best candidate. So there's conflicting interests, and it happens a lot, whether it's family or non-family members. And lack of experience. Most business owners, most advisors don't know how to do succession planning. And that's another emotional issue. And this is where I think business advisors can help. They don't know where to turn. I can't tell you how many times when I tell people what I do, oh, you do that, I need that. It's because there's not many people that sort of focus in this area, right? So what about the financial and legal obligations? Because those are real as well. You know, if I have a family business and the next generation is expecting to come in and take over, but I have to sell it for my retirement security, there's problems when you're faced with having to sell your business for your own financial security when your family or some of your employees don't want you to sell. You remain personally liable on company debt. This is the big one that most people miss. I'm working with three brothers. They own a construction firm. One brother is getting out, selling his stock, but he's personally liable on significant corporate debt. It's going to be really hard to get him out from underneath the personal guarantee. But again, we have to face these obstacles. Without facing the obstacles and ignoring them, they don't go away. You know, what's that saying? If you sweep everything under the rug, what do you have? You got a lumpy rug, right? I can't get the value I need to retire, so I have to continue. There are many companies that more income is generated than if you tried to sell the company. You see this a lot with distributors where there's not many assets and there's just a contract. And so that's an obstacle. Or you lose a valuable customer. You've developed these relationships and you're afraid if you leave, they will leave. In one of the stories I mentioned in my book about when I met with my financial advisor a few years ago, he's my age. He brought his 30-year-old son in, who is a very, very good financial advisor. And he said, hey, he's going to be working with you more and more as we continue. I went home. I said to my wife, hey, you know, Charlie's son is now working with him and we're going to have to work with him. And she said, good, Charlie's old. And so, you know, you have the potential of losing a valuable customer, or the tax obligations are too high. You know, given your corporate structure or whatever the case may be, you may have significant tax obligations. Many business owners, I'm sure you've experienced, don't appreciate what their number is. A few years ago, a gentleman called me up. He said, hey, I got this offer to sell my company. I think it sounds good. What do you think? And we had gone through a succession plan. We talked about his options. And I said, do me a favor. Call your CPA and find out what the net proceeds you get. He calls me back a week later. He said, Brad, I can't sell my company. I can't get enough money. So we worked on a few things. And eventually, he sold 2 years later for a whole lot more. But at least he knew what his number was because he didn't originally appreciate the tax cost. So those are the obstacles. What are some warning signs you can warn your clients about? When the family battles with management, because oftentimes family think they know better, but they're not involved in business. Or, there is a conservative management structure. They don't innovate. We don't want to change. Don't mess things up because, what's that famous line that everybody hates to hear? We've always done it this way. And there's an old line, what got us here won't get us there. The Innovator's Dilemma is a book about the failure of many companies because they fail to innovate. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Key non-family employees perceive no opportunity and they leave. I have to tell you that happens, particularly in a closely held business owner. If they don't see an opportunity for themselves, or more importantly, don't know what the deal is. Again, about certainty. I tell business owners it's really, really important to let people know what's going on because if you don't, that's going to create a lot of anxiety. And then loss of a key business relationship when people start leaving. I represented a very high-tech manufacturer. 80% of his revenue came from one client. After 40 years, the client came to him and said, you know what? If you don't come up with a succession plan, we're leaving. Now, the problem was How do you sell a company when 80% of the revenue is with one client? We actually did, but this is the warning signs. And you have no prepared successor. No one's around to take over. Those are warning signs. Family warning signs, right? Uh, there's a family feud. I mentioned at the beginning of the story. One side of the family thought their person should be named. The other side of the family thought their person should be named. It was an issue. Incompetent family members that want to be involved in the business. The universe of candidates, when you only limit it to your family, is very narrowed. I think Warren Buffett once said, family succession planning is like trying to take the 1960 gold medal winner and trying to take his son or daughter and make them a gold medalist. It's really hard when you limit it. So you have to be aware of that. No process for hiring family members. So your son or your daughter of a family business shows up and says, I want a job. That's a warning sign. I think that it's important to have a family employment policy. And this is a really big one we'll talk about in a moment for your clients, equal versus fair. Equal is a numerical calculation. It has nothing to do with fairness. And I tell people that use fairness as a tool and not as a weapon. What do I mean by that? I come home one day and I say to my daughter, you're taking over the business. What does my son, who wanted to be involved in the business, say? That's not fair. Whereas I say, hey guys, let's sit down and come up with a fair process. And we agree with the process. Now, we can't control the outcome. No one has a crystal ball. But we agree that this was a fair process. And this is what I think is important in a family situation. And then, of course, you've got inside and outside owners with conflicting interests. The inside owners want to invest, invest, invest. The outside owners, what do they want? They want dividends, dividends, dividends. So these are some of the warning signs that you see. So the common mistakes that business owners make that I have seen that you can take with you, and maybe, given your experience, you've seen it. One, they think succession is a one-time event or a transaction. It's not. It's a process. They avoid difficult conversations. I can't talk about that. It'll get my wife angry. It will get my key employee angry. You've got to be able to have adult conversations. Letting the tax planning drive the strategy, or as I like to say, let the tax tail wag the dog. Unfortunately, I have a client that gave 80% of his business away to his children under the theory of tax planning 20 years ago. The company hasn't done well recently. He hasn't done well financially, and he now has to ask his family members for the stock back. And guess what? They're refusing to give it back to him. He's in a bad way. So don't let the tax tail wag the dog. Another important one, your clients fail to determine their personal financial needs. I will tell you about 80% of the time I work with clients, they don't know what their number is, right? I'm working with a client right now in the Midwest. They make a ton of money from the business. And he's transferring the business to his kids. And he said, well, Brad, I'm going to take money out of the company. Why wouldn't my kids agree to that? I said, well, Stan, they probably won't, but if I was your son, I'd just say, how much and how long? You have to determine your financial needs. It's fair to the company, it's fair to the family. As I mentioned earlier, confusing fairness with equality. The two are unrelated. Another one that's a little subtle, but it's an important one, transferring minority interest without providing an exit option. So let's say your daughter's the heir apparent and you give her 60% of the stock and you give your son 40% of the stock. Well, as a minority shareholder, how does he get out? An author once talked about you have to give the prisoners a way to escape because they can be taken advantage of. Right? Waiting too long, as I like to say, the longer you wait to do your succession plan, the fewer the options you're going to have. And then lastly, not appreciating that succession is a multidisciplinary process. Look, I mentioned I'm a CPA, I'm a lawyer, I'm a business owner, but I will tell you, when we go through the succession planning process, We engage the lawyer, we engage the CPA, the financial advisor, because it's a team approach. Now, yes, I'm the quarterback and I make sure that there's execution, and that's what you can do, when you work with your clients on succession, but it's multidisciplinary. It's not tax, it's not creditor protection. It's not just being nice. It's not, there's the psychological aspect, there's a financial aspect of it, but you need to find a way to bring it all together, right? PwC did a study a number of years ago and found that over 70% of family businesses want to keep the business in the family if they can. But only 26% actually have a plan, right? Now, the next slide will demonstrate the effect of this, right? So if only 26%, is it any wonder only 30% of businesses survive to the next generation? Now, in all fairness, a quick stat I think is worthwhile. In 1958, a company on the Fortune 500 lasted 60 years. Today, it's down to about 17 years because of innovation. It's hard to run a business, right? But it's really, really hard in a family business. There was a study done, and that stat came from the Family Business Institute, and it gets harder and harder. There was two professors that did a study worldwide. They looked at over 3,000 family businesses that had net worths over $15 million, and this was 20 years ago. And they looked at what the failure rate was, and they came to the same conclusion. About 70% of the wealth was gone by the second generation. But then they asked a really, really insightful question. They said, why? Remarkably, it wasn't the lawyers and the CPAs. That was only attributed to 15% of the time. 60% of the time, there's a lack of communication and trust. And trust doesn't mean, someone stealing from you. Is, hey, Bob, can you have the report on my desk on Monday? Absolutely. Monday comes along. Where's Bob? He's out golfing. I can't trust him. And there's no way to communicate these issues on succession, from ownership. Dad doesn't want to talk about, mom doesn't want to talk about it. And 25% of the time was an unprepared successor. Right? So I tell business owners, if taking these statistics, which I believe are accurate, 85% of the failure is within your control by having a form of communication and preparing the successor. But then they went one step further. They said, okay, if 70% failed for this reason, what did the 30% who were successful do? What they found was that the overwhelming majority of the successful transitions worldwide, they developed a process of communication and transferring of ownership. And that's a huge takeaway today, if you remember anything, that this isn't just Brad Franc speaking. This is statistics that have held up for decades. Next, The Economist. Interesting study. They did a case study on an organization called the Heineken Association. That comes from the Bible. It's in Europe. In order to be a member of the Heineken Association, your company has to have been around for 200 years. That's a number of generations. Managed by a descendant. The family owns a majority of it and has to be in strong financial condition. And they said, okay, what did they do? We should know by now. The common element, according to The Economist, was there was a written plan and a process to address ownership and management. And then lastly, and I won't bore you with any more statistics after this, Cornell, who does a lot of family business work and are known nationally for it, they had a research done that found only 16% of the time was their failure. Not 70%, only 16% was their failure when they followed an orderly process. Right? So you need to, the short story is you need to find a process. I don't really care what process you select, but you need to find a process. It's not a transaction. Now, over the last 15 years, I've developed my own process that I think and I have demonstrated is successful. And it's a unique 6-step process, which I'm about to show you. I just put my book up there, as I explained earlier. And it was very well received. So let's talk about my process, right? So the first step, I believe, I call it the purpose step, the purpose stage. And I ask the business owner, what are your values? And research will show when there is a loss of a relationship, whether it's an employee, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a partner, is there's no shared values. So one of my values is showing up on time, and my employee doesn't show up on time. We don't share those values, we have a problem, and that relationship is not going to continue. But we need to list those values, because if we have common values, then when it gets hard, because it always gets hard, let me take a step back. I tell people my succession planning process is simple, but not easy. Right? It takes some work, right? It's a simple design, but it's not easy. So we've got to come up with a foundation. We come up with that foundation with our shared values. Then we say, okay, if these are our values, we respect others' opinion, we respect difference of opinion, we believe in integrity, those type of values. Then I say, okay, where are we going? The example I give some people is, I pull up in your driveway, I open the door, and I say, jump in. What's the natural response going to be? Where are we going? Right? In the Bible, it says, where there's no vision, they will perish. We need a vision. We need to know where we're going. And that's not in 5 years, 10 years. It's ultimately, hey, we want to continue this family business as a legacy, or we want to sell. I mean, I am agnostic as to what the outcome is for the business owner. That's their decision, right? But we need to establish where we're heading. Because if they want to sell, we're going to go right. If they want to keep the business, we may want to go left, right? And then why? I mean, we've got to sort of challenge the thought process. Simon Sinek, wrote the famous book, First Begin with Why, because you have to ask yourself, why do you want to keep a family business? Or why do you want to sell it? And does it align with your values? And when, it doesn't take long, but this is critically important, because I will tell you, in one situation, when the business owner was working on his succession plan, he was all frustrated, he didn't have a family member involved. His employees were his family. And I said, Jim, I said, remember why we're doing this? Because your employees are your family. And he stopped, he said, yep, you're right, let's go. Right? So sometimes you need to ground your clients on those issues. Next, I hate going to the mall. I don't know my way around the mall. So when I walk into the local mall, what do? I look for the big block with the map, and I look for my red dot, and I say, where am I? I have to tell you, many business owners, and I'm sure your clients, don't appreciate where they are with respect to succession. They don't know really what their succession plan says, if they have a buy-sell agreement, what the bylaws say. This is something that you really can help a client with. Just had a conversation yesterday. Life insurance, the buyout, one of the partners, was in the wrong entity. They just assumed it wasn't the right entity, but they did a reorganization a few years ago, and if it wasn't for me looking at the situation, they would never discover it. So they need to understand where they are. Excuse me. So first, we've identified where we want to go and how we're going to treat one another. Next, we identify where we are. That's stage 2. The second stage, I think, could be the most important stage in the process. And this is where I think I differ with many succession planning advisors and process. We identify the obstacles. Back to the obstacle is the way. And that's first in this category. What's preventing us from being there? There's a book called Down the Road Less Stupid by Keith Cunningham. And he said, if there were no obstacles, you'd be there already. Or I've heard another line, if there are no obstacles, it's probably not going to lead you anyplace special. There's always obstacles. My spouse doesn't like the CEO. I have to sell the company, but my employees would be upset with me, or my kids would be upset with me. I can't get the money I need. whatever those obstacles are, we need to put them down there. It is remarkable when the business owner can articulate these obstacles, some of the tension goes away. Just saying it has value, but we can't move on. And then what I suggest they do is, usually there's 10 or 15, pick the top 3. And then we sort of focus on those. Then we say, okay, if those are the obstacles, what are the strengths that we have? Well, we're not going anywhere anytime soon. We have a strong balance sheet. Whatever those are, that will be the leverage we will use to overcome those obstacles. Then in the roadmap, in my process, I say, okay, if we can overcome those obstacles, what good things will come from it? Well, I can retire as a CEO. I can establish what my retirement is. I can keep my employees. I can recruit people. So that's that's the third stage in the process. And then the fourth stage in the process, I call the mission stage. In my book, I talk about Storm and Norman Schwarzkopf. I love that guy. Bill Gates once said, most people overestimate what they can do in a year. They underestimate what they can do in 10. So you ask the business owner, look, I'm not asking you to do something today, tomorrow, next week, or next year. But if we're sitting here 3 years from today, what would you like to see have happened to feel good about your progress? Well, in 3 years, I'm going to be out of here. Or 3 years, I'd like to have identified the next leader. Or in 3 years, I know financially what I need to retire, whatever those are. So to give, and then we list the obstacles, and then we list the strategies to overcome, to achieve those objectives. So let me give you a football analogy. In the NFL, what's the objective of any NFL football team? It's to win the Super Bowl. Okay. And so the obstacles might be, the competition or the payroll. What are the strategies that we need to overcome? Well, we got to keep people healthy. We need a good taxi squad. We need to scout the other team. So those are the things that, you identify the objectives, and then you list the strategies to overcome them. Then you say, okay, Mr. Business Owner, if that's who, and the other thing is it gives them it's easier for them to conceptualize. If I asked you to do a marathon in a week, you'd freak out. But if I said, hey, if I gave you 3 years to run a marathon, you think you could do it? It's easier to conceptualize, right? So that's 3 years. The next step is, okay, if we know what our vision is, we know what our obstacles are, we know where we want to be in 3 years, what can we do over the next year to move us closer to our 3-year goals? And so we list these milestones. So it might be, and over the next year, I'm going to meet with my financial advisor to determine what my retirement needs are. It's usually there 70% of the time, right? Or I am going to identify a process to select the new leader. Whatever those are, we establish those milestones. And then we again, what are the tactics that we need to deploy? So back to my financial planner example, you might meet with your financial advisor or 1 or 2 financial advisors. You might meet with your CPA. Whatever those tactics are, that's what we're going to list over the next year. Right? And then lastly, as you might suspect, we list the quarterly tasks. Another terrific book called The 12-Week Year. The 2 authors state that we should all plan our lives around 12 weeks. Right? It's long enough to get stuff done, but short enough to keep our eye on the ball. And so I asked the business owner, I don't do these, or you wouldn't do these. What are the 4 or 5 tasks we can do over the next quarter to move us closer to our 1-year goal, to move us closer to our 3-year goal? And what I normally do is we'll identify a champion. They don't have to do it all, but they're going to show up in 90 days to report on that task. And there's that old line, if you want to improve something, measure it. I like to add, if you want to improve something exponentially, measure it and have to report out on it. Normally about 45 days within the quarter, I'll call somebody and say, hey, how's that task coming? Oh yeah, I need to get to that. And it's remarkable how much momentum gets going when people have to keep their eye on the ball and have to report on it. So we list those quarterly tasks. So, to review real quickly, we start with the purpose stage. What are we doing? Why are we doing it here? Then we identify sort of where we are. That's the discovery stage. Don't ever skip that process. It is remarkable how many times people don't realize and they sort of want to jump to the conclusion. So it's the purpose stage, the discovery stage, the challenge stage. And this is where I think business advisors can really help their clients. You can, and I've been told this myself, and I don't consider myself any great genius, because I'm in the room, I can ask questions in a very polite way, in a professional manner, that others can't or feel uncomfortable asking. And that has tremendous value in and of itself. So, I say, what about this? What about this? And then someone will sort of shake their head. Yeah, I guess so. I dealt with a gentleman out in San Francisco, and I said, he's 72 years old. Can you let go? He said, Brad, I'm glad you asked the question. I don't know if I can let go. Again, I'm happy to report only a month ago, we had our 5th meeting. It took 5 meetings. He was actually crying because he was so happy with the result that he got. But we identified those obstacles. Then we said, okay, what are we going to do in 3 years? What are we going to do in 1 year? And what are we going to do this quarter? And I have found more often than not that not only do we accomplish the 1-year goals, but we often get into the 3-year goals within a year's time. So there's a terrific book called Legacy. It's about the All Blacks, and there's a quote they put in their book by Nelson Mandela. Vision without action is merely a dream. Action without vision is merely passing time. But when you put vision and action together, you can change the world. And here's another important takeaway for you. If you take anything away, succession planning is planning and execution. You got to get stuff done. And that's where I think you can really help your client. So how does a certified succession solution advisor help? Right? They can clarify to the business owner, it's not a process. It's not an event, it's a process. Sorry about that, correction. You can facilitate difficult conversations. You can assess financial readiness. You can help design fair and functional ownership structures so that you explain to them, hey, if you're giving your son minority interest, be mindful that he might be taken advantage of or could be taken advantage of. And maybe he lives with it. I tell people, my job is to educate. I think that's your job. It's their job to make the executive decision. You can help establish good governance frameworks. I will tell you, best practices is to have a board of directors and maybe have 1 or 2 independents. And the companies where we've had that, it's worked really, really well. You can help them develop leadership and talent. I'm not saying you're going to be the leadership and talent expert, but you can identify that they need it and to help develop a process, engage a trainer, hold them accountable. How are we going to hold them accountable, right? These are the things that you can do. And you can coordinate with other professionals. I will tell you that when I'm working with other lawyers and CPAs and financial advisors, they welcome this opportunity because it really does help the client at the end of the day and helps them. And then the other thing that people say that they like about me and other certified succession solution advisors is provide accountability. You want to call it a nudge, call it a nudge, but we get stuff done. It's not enough to give somebody, some national expert, to give somebody a huge book to say, here's the solution. You got to help them do it, right? All right, so I have this succession solution certification program that I'd welcome you guys to participate in. Let's talk a little about what is it? Well, it explains what I just talked about in much greater detail. It's really what you need to do to not only design, as I said earlier, but execute an effective, achievable succession plan for your clients, right? It's a masterclass setup. There's 10 self-paced modules that you can go through at your pace with a detailed workbook and a test at the end. You'll learn how to use the succession solution roadmap, which is really the main tool that clients use. I like this. It's 11.5 by 17. It has those 6 stages. And as I like to tell business owners, if you want to get everybody on the same page, use one page, right? Don't a 20-page report, you know what happens to those 20-page reports. It gets stuck in a drawer or in a file on a computer somewhere and nothing happens, right? You of course, you attain certification status. And how about this? You get direct access to Wonderful Me. I hope that doesn't disappoint you. That's just a little bit of a joke, but I want you to be successful. And the only way I can assure you're successful is if I provide some guidance in that process. So um, since you're attending this webinar, if you are interested in the program, there's a discount. Act now. It's, by the way, we're not going away. There is a discount. Just wanted to thank everybody for participating. And there's a QR code, which I've only recently learned how to use, that if you're interested. And so, but before I sort of wrap up, and I'll be happy to take any questions. So what's in it for you? Why would I want to do this? And I'll just tell you from my experience why you'd want to do this. One, I don't, I haven't found a process like this. I really haven't. And I look and read everything about succession planning. Are there other processes? Yeah, but I haven't found one that works this well. One, as I like to say, don't try to compete with the CPAs, the lawyers, or financial advisors. Differentiate yourself. And you learn a different skill set. The other thing is you will deepen your relationship with your clients. It is remarkable. I practiced law for 35 years. I am closer to my succession planning clients than 99% of my legal clients because you really get close to them and you help them. It's also financially rewarding. I don't do this for nothing. I'm paid, and I'm sure you would be paid very, very well for this. You become an expert in a field that I believe is growing more and more and more. The silver tsunami, as they say, is happening. There are hundreds of trillions of dollars of wealth being transferred from the baby boomers to the next generation. Also, you join a pretty neat community. And the last thing is you just become a better professional. Even if you don't do this, you can identify these things. And isn't that what we're here to do, is help our clients? So I hope I've given you something to think about sort of what succession planning is, the importance of process, and then, in my process as well. So with that, I'll ask, is there any questions that are out there? And I'm looking for the questions, which I'm not seeing pop up, but I think that there are some out there. Let me see if I can find them. Okay. All right.
Hi, Brad.
Yeah,
This is Monique. Can you hear me?
I can.
Perfect. So we have some questions from the community on LinkedIn. Some folks
Okay.
who were able to join live, but wanted to get their questions answered nonetheless. Um, so we have, oh, I'm sorry if you can hear my toddler.
Yeah, it's okay.
Um, thank you. So one question someone asked was, for someone who wants to make sure their business survives them, what's the real risk of waiting just another year? So it sounds like this person is thinking about kind of putting it off or maybe has been putting it off. What would you say is the biggest risk?
Yeah, I think that the biggest risk that you run is, I like to say, succession planning is a critical risk factor in any business. And what you risk is an unintended event, unexpected event that occurs during that year period. Whether someone gets ill, the market changes. You don't give the next generation, your leader, time to develop. It takes probably 3 to 5 years really to develop that next generation. So, I tell people that, when you wait, would you rather find out that that heir apparent is not the right candidate sooner as opposed to later? And if you wait until the last year or two and then you discover that person isn't the right person, um, now you got a problem because you even have less time. So that would be my answer. Any
Thanks,
other ones
Brad.
that
We
you?
got we
Yeah.
got another question that is a lot of owners feel like they can't afford to slow down to plan. What would you say to someone worried this takes too much time or money?
Yeah, yeah, and it reminds me of I think it was Dwight D. Eisenhower who once said, "The urgent is seldom important, and the important is seldom urgent." And that we all have the same amount of time during the day, and they have to identify if this is important or not to them. And so if it's important, you need to find that time. It doesn't take a tremendous amount of time. I mean, typically what happens is, I'll meet with the business owner 4 times throughout the year. We'll start around 10 o'clock and then end around 2:30, 3 o'clock. So, the peel 4 days out of the year is not that difficult. And then when they realize, after they've gone through the first meeting, they realize it's not as scary, it's not as difficult, because a lot of the work is done by the advisor in that situation.
Great, thank you. And then we have one more question that is, so it says here, I always assumed succession planning was for big corporations. Is that a myth? Is this also helpful for smaller firms?
Yeah, I mean, it's succession actually. If you talk about big firms and small firms, you want to talk about a failed succession plan. Look at Disney and Bob Iger, who had to come back, right? Um, so it's big firms and very small organizations. In fact, I think it's harder with smaller companies because again, the universe of candidates that can take over or who you can recruit. Look, if you're a small company, you can't hire a Fortune 500 CFO, so you're limited with resources. That makes it harder to survive, and more important that you work on a succession plan. Whether that's you identify that there's not a successor and you need to sell, but you need to dedicate time because there are companies that just stop doing business and they close their shop. And that's not good for the owner. It's not good for the employees. And it's certainly not good for the community. So it is, I think it's harder sometimes with smaller companies, but it's just as important, if not more important.
Great. Thanks, Brad. Those are the questions that we have right now.
Good, good. Well, we're just about at the top of the hour. If
Brad, as a advisor, you mentioned there's a lot of difficult conversations that sometimes happen with through this process. And if I have my client's money right now, why would I want to get in this? And what is the risk to do so?
you mean what's the risk of doing the succession plan?
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
I'm getting in with my clients. I'm
yeah.
gonna do this. I'm gonna take your class, and I'm gonna do this. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks for your question. You raise a really good question. So why do I want to mess my relationship up with my client? And that's a real concern that I think many advisors have in all sorts of professions. And I guess the question is, in life, there's always risk. I would suggest to you that the reward is much greater than the risk because when you work with your client, whether you're a financial advisor or CPA, at least in my experience, you actually become closer. You learn more things about them. They become more, you become more of a trusted advisor than just, in your one single expertise. But it's a great question. It is not without risk, but I would suggest to you the reward is much greater. Thanks for your question.
Hi, this is Louisa. I don't So if I don't know if you were going to ask my question, but I just posted, what's the average fee that folks are charging for this?
Yeah, yeah, great question. And I'll be perfectly honest and frank with you, a quick story. So when I first started, probably 10 years ago, some guy said, well, somebody else is going to do this for $10,000. I said, well, I can do that for $10,000. Um, and I did it for the entire year. And I realized that probably wasn't the best price, but you do what you have to do. But typically, what I have found, it's anywhere between $5, 15, $20,000 per quarter. When I travel out of town, it's higher, but I don't think it's unreasonable to charge between $10 and $15,000 per quarter. And I will tell you, it's all about, it's what the Warren Buffett. It's not about the price; it's about the value. So that's what I have found. Does that help, Louisa?
Yeah, thank you. I actually do succession right now with my current existing clients. I work with business owners and small business owners, anyways. So whoever asked that question before, it does work for small business owners and entrepreneurs.
Yeah,
Um, and yes, they need this so badly.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and I think partnering with advisors or CPAs is really uh, a wonderful idea because they're just two different areas, right? It can only complement the services an advisor is already providing or a CPA is already providing, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's just remarkable when you get them engaged. They're like, well, don't forget about this and don't forget about this. And the client, you can't expect the client to know all the answers. So I think it's dangerous, Louisa, to try to do this without engaging them during the process. Look, they don't have to be in the meeting,
Right.
but you need to reach out to them. So
Yeah. Thank you.
you're welcome. Anybody else? Okay, hey, that we timed that really well. I have 12:57. What I was going to say, and anybody again, if they have questions, just interrupt me right now. What I was going to say is, look, I'm not going anywhere. If you have questions that you didn't feel comfortable asking today, reach out to me. My QR code is there. If you just sort of type in the succession solution, you go to my website, you can send me an email. I'm happy to help. I enjoy this process. Matter of fact, I just had somebody call me this week who signed up for the program. He called me yesterday. He said, I need to talk to you. I have 2 engagements. What do I do? And so we sort of talked through it. So I really, I enjoy this. This is sort of my passion. So with that being said, I will sign off. Again, anybody that needs anything, and if you want to sign up for the program, that would be great. Thank you very much.